Welcome to the Bonded Podcast Foundation Series, hosted by Dr. Patty and Lizzie Shutt,
where we explore attachment healing and the bonds that shape us as children, as adults, and as parents.
We talk about the joy, the complexity, and the challenges that come with forming deep human connection.
From before conception through early childhood and far beyond.
Whether you're expecting, adopting, navigating loss, or supporting someone you love,
or simply wanting to better understand yourself and the ways your early experiences still impact you today,
these conversations are for you.
The podcast isn't just about raising secure children.
It's about healing ourselves, breaking generational cycles, and creating relationships rooted in safety, trust, and authenticity.
You'll hear from experts and parents alike on topics like fertility and perinatal loss,
adoption, returning to work,
temperaments, identity shifts,
and the emotional realities that often go unspoken.
So settle in,
take a breath,
and know that wherever you are on this journey, you're not alone.
You are not alone.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bonded Podcast. Lizzie and I are excited to touch base with everyone and talk a little about some of the things that we found most helpful in healing for those struggling with attachment wounds.
Yeah, our main topic that we're going to share today is on self-compassion, which scares a lot of people often, or like they don't love to like hear about that, or aren't always so interested in learning about self-compassion. I find I feel like a lot of people downplay self-care, self-love. They don't think, oh, that's really.
I mean, I honestly, when I first was learning about self-compassion, and it was sort of part of really mindfulness teachings and practices as I was developing in my early career as a psychologist, I kept like shying away from it. It would loving kindness practices, things like that. They just, I don't know. I felt a little, I want to say like uncomfortable. And like Lizzie said, it's sometimes hard to describe, but it is a common thing for people to think that being self-compassionate is somehow being kind of self-pity and things like that. And it absolutely isn't. The more that I eventually started reading more about it and learning and then eventually training in it, I came to really understand not only the difference of kind of what people assume that being kind and compassionate to yourself looks like, and but that it actually, the research demonstrates that it is super powerful. And I can attest to my own practice and how I can feel the changes that have been made through my own inclusion of self-compassion practices and that of many clients. So I am excited to share a little bit about it today, specifically, as Lizzie mentioned, even talking a little bit about how it can be helpful with healing attachment wounds.
Yeah,
So
when I think about healing attachment wounds, I think about creating relationships and restoring connection and developing that secure attachment is kind of what we're doing in adulthood, is how can we develop that earned secure attachment? Is that the correct terminology? Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So curious to really, you've worked a lot. You're obviously trained in this mindful self-compassion, so you went through the whole training, and are trauma attachment therapist. So how self-compassion, will dive into how it can actually help us have that sense of rebuilding this secure bond with ourselves, right?
Yeah, so I will share a little bit first about like the components of self-compassion. So, mindful self-compassion course, which is one that I teach, it's this was a practice developed by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, and it has three components. To be considered self-compassion, there are three components, meaning one is that we're actually offering ourselves kindness, number one, instead of self judgment or self criticism. And number two, it's cultivating common humanity instead of isolation. So, this is a sense of, I'm not alone, other people have experienced or feel the way I do. And the third component is mindfulness. So, instead of over identifying with, sometimes a feeling or an experience that we had as like I'm unlovable type of thing, we can cultivate mindfulness of the feeling that might be arising without over identifying with it as being it's describes me and is my whole life. So essentially I think that sometimes the hardest part, as people are developing these practices, they often come to me with some mindfulness practice so they're able to kind of be aware and identify and notice kind of experiences that they're having, whether they're emotions or thoughts. And they might even have a lot of awareness about where these things come from. And so that's helpful to be able to be aware of what am I feeling, this mindfulness in this moment. The hard part can then be applying and being kind to yourself, because what often comes automatically and sometimes even a little bit unconscious, right? It's a little bit kind of in the background. It might not even formulate into words that we're using, but it can be sort of the way in which we treat ourselves. In mindful self-compassion, we're invited to try to cultivate this way of being with our own pain and suffering like we would someone that we loved and cared about. In fact, sometimes even how we would treat a young child. So this is often a real kind of, first of all, difficult for many people who've experienced a lot of trauma. One of their kind of go-to things is to really shut down, to in fact, not even feel like they have any needs at all. And so a huge part of mindful self-compassion is reconnecting with what our needs are, maybe what our unmet needs were as a child. And so being able to make contact with this, to care about those things, and to bring this sort of understanding rather than this self-criticism or this shutting down. So this is it's hard to imagine, really, I think, how powerful this is until you take the class. I was thinking about the other day, as we were planning, we have an upcoming class, and we were talking a little bit about mindful self-compassion. And I had a client who, after many years kind of working with early childhood stuff, she came into a mindful self-compassion class, and she was like, why have you been keeping this from me? She was really like upset, like, this is, oh my God. And I have the same kind of experience, is that, it seems almost sort of simple, but when you actually do the practices and you partake in the coursework of mindful self-compassion, there's something really powerful that happens. I've taught it in some different formats. I've even taught some of it individually. But I have to say the real magic is in taking it in a class, a classroom setting. So being with others in the process. So again, I know that this is sometimes hard for people to commit to taking the class. Lizzie, you've kind of been there with me trying to get people to really commit to showing up even for themselves. And I think that sometimes it's really when people are really in a lot of pain or at the end of their rope, kind of like that's it. Like I'm in so much pain that they might finally commit to doing some of this work, right?
Yeah. And how that invitation of self-compassion really, once we do learn it, is that we hopefully can give ourselves what we need before we get to that burning out point. And what comes to mind for me so much, because this is the world that I'm in, is that compassion fatigue, and how, some listeners might be people that are caregivers, or their job is about giving to others, and that ultimately leads to burnout when you don't create space and give yourself that nourishment in return.
Yeah.
And how we usually go into these jobs, or we start a family and we have these friendships because we love other people and we are relational beings. We love to give. And we can only give when we are also, filling ourselves up. And I feel like mindful self-compassion has really taught me how to create more of this balance of giving and receiving. And yeah.
Yeah, I think what you said about even caregivers, right? People who go into caregiving roles often come at that from even themselves having, and this isn't to say this is everyone or stereotypical, but people who tend to give and give a lot often have that as an adaptation, even in childhood. So they may have learned that getting their needs met really, they were more effective when they were, the ones giving, the ones being, the ones loving and supporting even others, sometimes even other siblings when the parents weren't around and available. And so that even those loving, nurturing people are not always loving and nurturing towards themselves. Okay, they can be actually either kind of hard on themselves, even, even have challenges identifying their own needs. So this is definitely an area, if you are a caregiver, and you identify with that as a potential, like, yeah, I probably, adapted to my own childhood by giving and doing for others. And this can be very rewarding. It does feel good to give to others. But like Lizzie said, that is a surefire way to end up in burnout if you're a professional caregiver, right? And so I do think mindful self-compassion is a powerful thing for caregivers to actually engage in as a regular practice.
I'm curious if we kind of now look at, more of, I don't want to quite say the opposite side of the spectrum, but if we're looking at more of like the avoidant attachment, and how some people really avoid getting close to others, and how mindful self-compassion would benefit them, and
Yeah.
what you see with those types of clients, and how they might enter mindful self-compassion differently.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think that in general, avoidant attachment styles are, they avoid relationships. Number one, because unconsciously there's a sense of I'm not going to get my needs met. So it's a way of avoiding any kind of disappointment, rejection, abandonment again. So if they don't need anything from anyone, then they're safe from those feelings, right? So it's tricky because in mindful self-compassion, people may not necessarily come into it even having a sense of that they have unmet needs. Okay. I mean, this is something that I think, I've witnessed this before, where someone's really shut down. And what I think appears, and this is one of the interesting things, is when they will struggle with being kind to themselves. They'll struggle with that. They'll think it's silly, and likely struggle. And so what's more likely to show up are more of the anxious attachment. I do think avoidant people with avoidant styles will come in, maybe suggested by a therapist who's working with them, and really is tuned in at recognizing that, they have unmet needs. And they might be suffering, but almost like a suffering in silence kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense. So, yeah, if you are a listener and you might have more of that avoidant tendency, know that you are still very much welcome in this space.
I mean, I would love to. I try to get all my avoidance in to MSC, and it's tough. It's really tough. I might need to call it something else. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I play with that idea because there are people who really do resist coming into it. And I understand that. I mean, I'm definitely someone who, I can imagine I wouldn't have signed up for it either. Somebody would have needed to really push me into it. Yeah. So, I think about, when I think about healing, even early kind of childhood wounds. So maybe you don't identify with necessarily a certain attachment style, but there's a sense of even sort of neglect or even abandonment or something in early childhood. One of the things that I often say to people is we tend to look for these needs to get met in others, which is natural, right? But as an adult, we can be looking like to our spouse or our partners to be meeting these needs. And we're frustrated, unhappy in the relationship because we're trying to get these childhood needs met. And so this is, I think about early in my training, I wasn't ever trained formally in imago therapy, but it's kind of a couple's work of where the couple is sort of looking at understanding how they were sort of attracted to one another. And I think that imago has a lot, has been some great work with couples in helping them to really both understand why they came together and, in fact, why they're having difficulty. Okay. And I think about even some of the self-compassion work can be woven into that as we come to understand. And I think that individual work, where I try to teach my clients to individually step back from trying to get that need met and see if you can cultivate meeting it yourself, at least as much as you possibly can. So I'm thinking about, even if you're dating, let's say, because this happens a lot, not in my early days, because we didn't really have cell phones when I was dating. And so we didn't have the issues that people have today where they expect people to answer right away, right? So you text someone and then you're like waiting and waiting and waiting. And then, of course, if you have anxious attachment, you're thinking right away, you're projecting your own anxious thoughts. Like, oh my God, they're not answering. Oh, they don't like me anymore. They're, maybe they're with somebody else. They're talking to other people. All kinds of stories run through someone's mind at that point. And then, of course, let's fast forward. Oh my gosh, it's been a day and they haven't responded. Well, this, clearly means that they don't like me anymore. They don't want me. They're not interested. And so this ability to really, particularly during dating, I find, I like to teach people this self-compassion break, right? Because dating's rough. You have to, I tell my clients, like, you've got to be prepared really for rejection, because not everybody is your ideal person. Like, that's just not possible. So you have to go out into the world of dating and expect rejection, and expect to have to also let other people down, because this is a process of getting to know people. And so during that process of putting yourself out there, you really need to be able to be kind to yourself, to love yourself through that process. Otherwise, it will be more painful than necessary. Okay. And, even the idea of of settling with somebody just because, there's so much anxiety around dating that people will just sort of settle for whoever is the person who's responding, which isn't also helpful, right?
Yeah, that's what really came up for me as you were speaking, is how really taking this process as you're describing, using compassion and also knowing that rejection, or you rejecting someone, is just kind of getting you closer to the actual person that you are meant to be with and that you will enjoy time with, um, rather than making up all these stories about yourself, critical, judgmental things.
I even
Or
think that dating is also a way of getting to know yourself, right?
yeah,
That when you can embrace the practice of dating and really coming to understand, like, what feels good to you, what's important to you, how do you feel when you're with another person. And so when you're able to do that with these tools, okay, and often people are really lacking these tools. They just go out on a date and it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall, as opposed to going out and being really clear of understanding, what is it that I want? How do I want to be treated? If I don't even treat myself nicely, how do I even know what it's like to be treated kindly and compassionately?
huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of dating. I also think even in relationships, right? So we can find ourselves now in a relationship that we would like to continue to grow. Okay, maybe there's a sense of, again, I don't think that this is early on during early dating. It can happen at any stage in life. Okay, so you could be find yourself in midlife dating again, or in even a marriage where, I think about, having, one marital partner, but multiple marriages, right? The early marriage, the sort of middle life, and then the later stage, and how, in fact, we're continuing to grow and build awareness around ourselves. And I can honestly say that, the easier it is to be in relationship with another person, it will grow. You will grow with ease the more that you are able to meet your own needs, which doesn't mean that you don't have needs. It's one of these weird things, because my clients often get upset because they're like, well, what do you mean? What's the point of being in a relationship?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't really know how to describe it, but it's sort of like when you're not needy, okay, and you're present and there, but not in a needy way. People want to be there to support you, versus when somebody is showing up in relationship and really has kind of no ability to really meet their own needs. They're really putting these expectations on other people all the time. sometimes even on their parents, clients, that I'm seeing in their, 30s and 40s, and they're still really like pretty attached to their parents meeting a lot of their needs. Okay. This really reflects, a lack of kind of individuation in some ways, and places where maybe they didn't fully grow into meeting their own needs. Okay. Now, I want to kind of make a cultural, because I'm speaking probably from like a Western kind of culture where, there is a tendency to, grow up and individuate and take care of yourself and be independent, versus other cultures where it's quite typical to really be sort of interdependent, even multiple generations where they might all live together and they don't completely individuate. But there's a sense of collective, which I think is really cool as well. Okay, a collective sort of interdependent relationships are still very different than an adult who's dependent and having dependency needs still as an adult. Okay, still wanting someone to meet those childhood needs. So I like to call those like dependency needs. Okay. Because when we're adults, we don't really, unless we have unmet needs from childhood, right? We feel a sense of independence, even though we might need other people.
Yeah, we feel, capable to go out and risk like that failure or that rejection. We have that like capacity to kind of handle it more than if those needs were unmet. And then we really feel like it's a real stab in the heart when we get that rejection versus having, of these needs already more so met.
Yeah. I think for some people, and I'll just maybe speak to listeners who, even the languaging of unmet needs, of talking about unmet needs, I think of needs of like some really kind of profound needs of being seen, right? Of, this sense of, again, we talk about this early, like babies are getting this need met. They don't know they're getting that need met, but they are. And they need it. Babies need interaction. They need to be seen. It's one of the things where when you're like playing with a baby, and it can be really helpful to really mimic the baby. When they start to like make noises and then you make the same noise, it's like this is something where they're building this sense of connection, okay, with other humans. And this is really a profound developmental thing where they feel like they're being seen and heard. Okay, and this isn't something that's cognitive. It's a sense of I exist. Okay, it's almost like a this invisible thing. It's not a cognitive. It's a felt sense of being like I exist because there's this interaction happening. And it's coming from you heard what I said and now you said it, and we're playing this little game back and forth. And it's very simple. We're barely doing anything, okay? But you're doing everything developmentally that your child needs at that critical stage for them to feel like they actually exist and are important, and somebody hears them and responds to them. Okay, so when you grow up without that, okay, or it's really inconsistent. So there's like two sort of negative scenarios. One is like there's like a lot of neglect, a sense of absence, or that sense of like it's here and it's gone, it's here and it's gone, right? Which is what we find turns into that real anxious, preoccupied. It's like, when's it, when is it going to come back? Because it's gone now, and it's really hard to tolerate that, because it isn't really consistent. Okay, and so I think about the sense of neglect because people don't connect with that need. Like, who nobody says, "Oh, I need to feel like I even matter or exist." It's more about, we kind of understand this by, if you're someone who's has these kind of automatic beliefs, like, oh, well, yeah, I don't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter, or I don't matter, or nobody
It's
really
fine.
cares.
I'm
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that sense of like, I'm not actually important. Okay. And I think it speaks to some of that really early. So here's the magic, you guys, with MSC. Like, it literally starts, you start to almost grow ever so slowly from the very beginning of the first few classes, as you start to grow and heal these places inside of you. Like, you literally grow secure attachment by simply feeling and sensing those attachment wounds. Those feelings will arise, okay? They'll be uncomfortable, and you'll have these new tools to be able to just pause and be with it, and to acknowledge, express understanding, compassion, kindness. One of my favorite things is really, and it's a lot of the work that even I have done, is really began to really nurture this sense of seeing myself as a young child, seeing myself at some of those critical stages of where, my sense, because I don't remember, like kids don't remember exactly. They have more of a felt sense of these early developmental things. And so this ability to sort of hold that younger part of you, to get vulnerable enough to like imagine that younger self, being afraid or feeling sad, feeling alone, and being able to sort of hold her in awareness and be like, it's okay, I'm here, I got you, I love you, you're safe with me, right? And that literally builds a sense of safety, security, caring, like I'm cared for. And it grows that unbelievably. And the more that you repeat it when difficult things come up, the more powerful the healing, the more it grows and changes. And, suddenly, you are more secure.
Yeah. Something that I really want to bring up that I know we love to have conversations around is um, you love to share this idea that healing attachment wounds, especially like the early childhood trauma, slower is faster. And I think MSC does a really beautiful job at like slowly like nurturing this bond with yourself. It's not like we're ripping the heart open and you're going into that child and you're gonna,
Yeah.
revisit those traumatic moments and heal that. It's not like that. It feels very, contained, and you being, the facilitator and very trauma informed, um, do a great job at like letting people know, what we're doing and how to support yourself if it ever does become too much.
Yes.
That just, yeah.
You are so right on, Lizzie. I absolutely love the curriculum because, as a trauma therapist, because it is so trauma informed. Because there is literally like, this is what we're gonna do, and if you don't feel safe, you don't have to do it. You can just listen and maybe try it later. So there's a lot of permission in it. There's a lot of encouragement to take it slow. That slower literally is faster. And it's unbelievable that the slower you go, the faster you'll get there. And I do have people that retake 2, 3, 4 times. I think in my next class, I have somebody who's already signed up it's their 4th time.
Yeah,
So
it'll be my third.
okay, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I mean, it really does speak to, and you'll be able to feel it, that every time you take it, there's like a new piece, a deeper part of it that really speaks to you. And you're just ready. There's like a readiness for the next kind of level or deepening of the practice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
I
excited.
know it's one of the things I love to continue to offer to people, even in our Sangha, is to continue to do practices and to weave this constantly into our mindfulness practice. Because, I mean, even if you don't identify as having childhood trauma, that, it's quite likely that people have experienced. I mean, some sort of loss or neglect or something at a particular age or stage, and how I've met a few people in my life who pretty much have gotten through life relatively unscathed, okay? But that's really not that common. Okay. It's hard. It's hard. Even, I think as a parent, I really love teaching self-compassion too to parents, because it's hard to raise children, and it's hard to be a working mom and raising children, and the fear of making mistakes and things like that. And so I think self-compassion practice for parents is huge. It really, really allows you to really be mindful of what matters, and to be also compassionate with yourself for when you make a miss, when you make a mistake, because you will, as most parents will. So I do really love for new parents to join in self-compassion. It will really help them.
So excited. Class begins next week. And this is the short course. Patty also teaches the full course, and we also plan to do a mindful self-compassion retreat weekend. So we'll keep sharing, the information in the show notes about what's coming up, and whether you join us for this class or get on the wait list for the next one, we would love to share these practices with you.
Yes. Thanks, Lizzie, for chatting a little bit about self-compassion and how it can really heal really early trauma.
Yeah. Thank you for teaching. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. If it spoke to you, it'll probably speak to someone you love too. Share it with a friend and leave us a 5-star review to help spread the message it's never too late to heal.